Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where every day I try and explore how technology is transforming our world, but also explore areas that we all take for granted in life. For example, when lockdown arrived, office workers all over the world were struggling to work from home, and many were discovering that they weren't actually needed. But what I did learn during that time was who the real key workers are in this world, who keep everything in this world ticking over, everything from healthcare to supermarkets. These are the people that we needed in a time of crisis. But what also stood out for me was looking at empty supermarkets, and it made me realise just how fragile the supply chain really is. And I'm not just talking about people fighting over toilet rolls, because many organisations are guilty of implementing high-level tech such as AI, RPA and blockchain internally. But the fact that 54% still rely on paper-based processes, which lead to not only widespread waste, but lengthy processing times and a complete lack of supply chain transparency, leads to suboptimal decision-making. So today's guest is Christian Lanng, co-founder and CEO of a company called Tradeshift, which is a $1 billion unicorn supply chains payments platform used by over 1.5 million companies across 190 countries, including 150 of the Fortune 500. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to London so we can speak with Christian now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Hey, I'm Christian Lanng, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Tradeshift, who built cloud software for supply chains, which normally is one of those boring topics you think you shouldn't really know about, but actually sort of is the plumbing of a lot of the global trade, and therefore I think sometimes really exciting.
And you guys are far from boring as well. I mean, Tradeshift is a $1 billion unicorn supply chain platform used by over 1.5 million companies across 190 countries, including 150 of the Fortune 500, which is just phenomenal. But for everyone tuning in and hearing about you for the first time, can I ask that you set the scene and tell the listeners a little bit more about the kind of problems that you solve and what makes you different from all the other solutions out there?
I mean, I think, it's hard to sort of imagine as consumers because we are connected in everything we do in our daily lives, right? I mean, all the apps we use on our phone communicate with other apps. You can share stuff and you can very easily collaborate around things digitally today. But that's not true for companies. And I think 10 years ago when we started Tradeshift, we looked at the modern supply chain where large buyers, they're trading with their suppliers all over the world. And most of that trade was happening on fax, email, PDF, spreadsheets, paper. You wouldn't believe 80-90% of it was essentially just manual, and then a huge army of people trying to process it. And we had this very simple theory that, as cloud computing became more ubiquitous everywhere, it would, sort of drive the connection of everything. And so we said, what's going to happen when all of these supply chains are going to be connected in the cloud? What is that business network going to look like? What's going to be the equivalent to Facebook, but for businesses? And that's sort of the problem we went into trying to solve, to digitize all of these connections between companies all over the world, and been doing it for the last 10 years. And obviously today, we as you said, we're in more than 100 countries, in 190 countries, in fact. And it's just been a very wild ride to see sort of the global uptake of that. And I mean, today we're actually growing faster than we did in the beginning. So it's a little bit of a rocket ship, but we're trying to hang on.
And you've enjoyed fantastic success. And although we are in uncertain times at the moment, from Google to Amazon, many companies were founded just before or during a crisis. And other people say that a recession is often a great catalyst for innovation. So can you tell me more about how many leaders today will have to take a page from that very same rule book there to come out on top? Because I think it's easy to become overwhelmed with everything that's happening at the moment, isn't it?
So I think, and first off, we actually came up with the idea to Tradeshift in 2008, so in the middle of a crisis, right? And started it right after when there was no money around. And I think there's something that's really, really great about a crisis, and that is it forces people to reset their expectations, right? So when the world goes on as it normally does, everybody has a standard set of conventions and how you should do things. But the moment you have a crisis, you, by the world, get forced to change one of your beliefs, right? And once you have that change in one belief, you're open to changing all of your beliefs. And I think that's actually what creates the opportunity, right? And as an example, right, all government all over the world, they're all required, I don't know for how many years, that you have these stupid paper forms you fill in when you go over the border, right? That's just standard. When you arrive here in the UK, you have to fill out a form and you hand it in. And I just came over now from the US today, and the first thing I noticed is I didn't have to hand in that paper form anymore, because they realized that we can't have people exchanging all of this paper. So in less than a few months, they figured out removing something that's been there for years and years and years, and probably just been paperwork that's been processed the same way for the last 50 years. So I think what a crisis brings is a challenge to how you view the world. And I think, most people have a very hard time, once you're stuck in something and you do it the same way every day, to change your perspective. And that's really what a crisis make possible for you, to change that perspective.
It's interesting that you say that, because we are surrounded by experts, futurists, analysts, and etc., all predicting and advising what we need to be doing next. But of course, if we go back to December last year, it was those same experts that were filling our timelines with all the hope and optimism and what exciting things technology was going to accomplish in not only a new year, but a new decade. And it shows you just how unpredictable life can be. But like we were saying at the beginning of this podcast, COVID does represent a global tragedy. But do you think it is an opportunity, isn't it, to reset and rebuild in a way that we failed in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis? And I say we, because I know you didn't. You made the most of it. But it is an opportunity, isn't it?
I absolutely think so. All right. I mean, just to take one example, all over the world now, you have workers working from home, for very large companies even, right? And if you've gone back 7 months, most of the HR departments of those companies have said that would be impossible, right? And I mean, in fact, that's changing real estate already all over the world. I mean, commercial real estate is in the dumps, but guess what? Everybody who now don't need to go to the office, they're moving out of the cities, right? So it's changing the cities. You see e-commerce pattern picking up all over the world. I think we all thought we were digital before this, but the amount of time we now live our lives digitally will change the world essentially forever, right? And I think there's a lot of opportunities to be discovered around those changed consumer behaviors, those ways we think about where we work, where we eat, what we do, and so I think that's just a natural set of opportunities. But I also think that when you look at sort of the future, right? The future, everybody think about the future sort of a straight line where there's just growth, like up and to the right, straight line. But that's not how the future arrives. It always comes in these big shifts. So there's an accumulation of pressure, where nothing really happens for a very long time, even though we get better and better in technologies. And then there's this shift where something happens that unlock all of it. And suddenly you see this explosion of things, right? You saw that after the Second World War. You saw it again, actually after the Vietnam War. It was the Vietnam War that introduced containers to the world. The American Navy, they used containers to ship equipment to Vietnam, and then on the way back, they picked up electronics in Japan, and that sort of kickstarted the whole electronics revolution, right? So I think the future, while technology might march in a up and to the right line, the spread and distribution of it comes in big shifts, and there will always need to be a catalyst for that. And I think that's what's interesting about a crisis. And don't get me wrong, I mean, COVID is an absolute crisis. I mean, the mismanagement we've seen of COVID, honestly, in the US, where hundreds of thousands of people will die. That was unnecessary. Enormous tragedy. But I also think, again, back to the technology side, right? Like, there's more than 11 vaccines now underway. 7 of them are using cutting edge DNA modeling methods, like RNA methods to sort of print and model the DNA and then the RNA, which is brand new, never been done in a vaccine before. But because of the size and scale of this threat, we're trying new ways. And actually, we found out we can maybe get a vaccine much faster to market in the future.
And before you came on the podcast today, I did do a little bit of research. And I read something that's quite interesting, that about your belief that the answer is always digital plus finance as default. So can you tell me a little bit more about that belief and why you believe it's the way to make processes more resilient?
So I think technology don't solve any problem in itself, right? I could take an example, right? We invented the credit cards, and nobody dared use them because what if our money got stolen? And then the banks, they combine the credit card with insurance. So if you spend money, it'll get covered. But we're looking at a similar problem right now in business. So for instance, we have developed software that allows for the automatic using AI approval of any business document. Somebody sent you an invoice, should you pay or not? And of course, if you're a large company, you might receive millions and millions of these. So we have the software that can automatically approve that invoice. And we can prove mathematically it can do it better than a human. But still, when we go and give that to the CFO and we say, hey, here's this amazing thing you can use, he says, yeah, but with the old method, I know who to fire. With the new method, I can't really fire the AI, right? So what we were able to say to him is, what if we combine this technology with insurance? We will simply insure you against loss. And then he's all in, right? So, sometimes what finance can do in using financial services in conjunction with new technologies, it can get you over the hump on the usage. It can take away that, fear that might be around what happens if something goes wrong. And of course, we can't always do that, right? I mean, unfortunately, we can't just insure our way out of self-driving cars because we're going to be inside them. I'm going to be afraid of dying, which is not something you can insure away. But you can do it, for instance, with money and processes that don't affect humans that way.
And I'm curious, from the conversations that you're having, are businesses ready yet to go from that 30 to 40-year-old paper focus models to utilizing platforms like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, that long list of software tools, and continuing the same service that customers are used to and are expecting now?
I mean, I think it's incredible to see what's possible just to do over Zoom today, right? I mean, we have schools teaching the whole curriculum over Zoom. We have, our families staying together and, checking in on each other through Zoom. We have doctor's appointments. Just think about that one thing, that almost all doctor appointments today now is available over Zoom. And then think about how much pain you had in the past of getting an appointment, finding the doctor, going there in person, and the convenience of just saying, hey, call your doctor up, describe your symptoms. If it's something small, they can immediately do a prescription for you, right? So I think you are going to see sort of a shortening of the world and a change of expectations. But there are obviously going to be areas where, we maybe not as ready to do it yet. I think, again, self-driving cars is a really good example, right? Because when you talk about, several tons of metal, hurtling down the freeway, everybody gets a little nervous when you talk about software running that, right?
Absolutely. And something else I was reading about you was that you said that businesses need to stop doing digital on top. Can you expand on that? Because I think there's some fascinating insights around that. And it's something that I've seen as well, especially in the airline industry, where we just keep building technology on technology on technology on technology. But what are your experiences around them?
So I mean, the modern business software stack is like, archaeology, when you dig down and you just find layer upon layer upon layer of all the stuff underneath, right? And at the very bottom, you probably find some old IBM mainframe still running. And for many years, our focus in digital has been on changing what the user sees, making a newer, prettier skin, right? Like making everything more user-friendly. But unlike consumer, where the whole stack has been changed, it's fully digital when I send you a picture, underneath this, there's still mail rooms, there's still paper being scanned in. And because we hidden it by sort of like a fake digitalization being on top, we didn't notice. Actually, we didn't notice until COVID hit and we had to send all the workers home. And suddenly every process came to a halt because there was nobody to open the envelope, put it in the scanner, and that way get into the pretty SAP system where you can believe you have all of this big data. Right, so all of this big data comes from somewhere, and typically today actually from analog sources. So one of the big beliefs we have is you've got to go to the root of it and actually digitize the underpinnings to really truly drive transformation on the top.
And to bring everything that we're talking about to life and the kind of work that you're doing, because what you've achieved is nothing short of phenomenal. So can you tell me a little bit more about digitizing almost every level of the supply chain? Because that is an incredible feat on its own, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at a modern supply chain, the phone you have, or the stereo you have at home, it probably have typically 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 steps of suppliers involved in producing that. For modern Fortune 500 company, you're talking about tens, if not 20 or thousands, even sometimes hundreds of thousands of suppliers sort of orchestrated all over the world, right? And if you imagine now, every single step is happening on a process that has friction. It might be a payment invoice, it might be a fax purchase order, it might be a spreadsheet you have to type in, and then you multiply it with the scale of that operation. It's very clear that for a modern company, it's hard to change stuff, right? because to change that, you got to change what everybody is doing in that massive ecosystem downstream. And one of the things that we make possible is by having almost like a Facebook-like network, we make it possible for large buyers to invite their suppliers, and then for their suppliers to invite their suppliers to join. And it sort of creates this sort of viral effect where every link in the supply chain gets digitized. And what you have once that is done is you have an extremely flexible platform, because you can push a new business process with a push of a button, and it goes everywhere down that supply chain. But it also unlocks some opportunities that weren't possible before, right? So if you're a small supplier somewhere in the UK, or let's say in Southeast Asia, you don't always have access to the right forms of finance. You might not have access to global banks the same way that big companies do. But because now that everything is digital, we can prove that you're trading with a very large company. We can suddenly give you access to finance at a much cheaper cost than you could before, because there's that link of proof all the way along. So we think there's actually also just a huge opportunity for all of these companies to grow faster, get access to more customers, and actually just access capital a lot cheaper than they are today.
And do you have any use cases or examples that will just help everyone listening understand the kind of difference that you're making with Tradeshift?
Yeah, so we're working right now on a massive project with a fast consumer goods company around responsible sourcing in the supply chain, right? So they're sourcing a lot of palm oil, and as we know, there's problems with some of the sources of palm oil that are not as good, and quite devastating for both the economy but also the environment in these countries. And they, for many years, they actually want to do the right thing to get the palm oil from the right sources, but it's very hard, because there's these aggregators that just bundle and buy, and so you can't access the last mile. With our platform, we've been able to link all of those smallholders to the buyer. And then we actually said to them, if you can prove with audited inspections that you're producing this in an environmentally friendly way, the cost of capital for your business will drop. It'll be cheaper. So, we're giving them a big carrot for doing the right thing. And that got everybody to sign up and actually pull from that program, because they then got access to cheaper capital. So we get something going here where the right thing is happening for the planet, but it's also just a huge benefit for the businesses involved, because everything is digital rather than being paper.
And looking forward to the future, what kind of technologies excite you in this space? Presumably it would be AI, RPA, and blockchain, but is that what it is, or is there something else?
I think blockchain is probably one of those technologies that's going to be really ubiquitous and mean a lot in 20 years.
Yeah.
And I think, it was William Gibson who famously said the future is here, but it's not evenly distributed yet, right? I think AI, for instance, artificial intelligence, is going to have an impact in a much, much shorter term, right? I mean, we see it within medicine, we see it within material science, we're going to see it in supply chains. We're pretty much going to see it everywhere. And I think that's going to have a massive impact early. And I think RPA is sort of essentially just like a fix on an old system to get it to be AI-like. But what we're really going to see in the future is systems that have native AI built in from day one. There's no need to sort of add an RPA layers on top. I think other areas that I would watch out for is material science and distributed production. We can today build machinery and robotics that can produce 1,000 pairs of shoes at the same unit cost that before it would cost us. We would need to produce 1 million shoes, to get the same unit cost, and that's going to change how the global supply chains they're orchestrated, where they sit. We're going to have a lot of sort of reshoring of a lot of services and production, honestly. And then the last thing that excites me a lot is real-time translation, right? I mean, real-time translation is getting a lot closer than most people realize. And what that's going to be is, it's essentially going to be like the container for the service economy, if you know what I mean, right? Because the container enabled physical goods to easily translate and go everywhere in a standardized global system, right? And of course, that haven't happened to services yet, because at least, if it's an English-speaking country, you need to be able to speak English to serve them, with services. Or if it's, German, you need to speak German and so on. But with real-time translation, you can have service workers anywhere in the world, and they can serve, an audience or customers in another country. So I think real-time translation is going to be a massive boost for the service economy.
And looking into the future, what's next for Tradeshift? I appreciate you probably can't share too much, but what excites you about the road ahead?
I mean, I think we are very, very focused just on continuing to do what we do really well, which is to connect companies and, open up the opportunities to access more customers, get cheaper capital, grow their business. I mean, that's really at the heart of everything we do all the time. I do think, we see some really exciting opportunities around driving more integration within verticals. So we're doing a lot more with logistics these days. We're doing a lot more with manufacturing. And I think the opportunity sort of linking a lot of the sort of core standardized business processes with some of the new sustainability trends is very, very exciting, because companies are truly really pushing that now, and not just because it's sort of a nice slogan, but actually because it affects the bottom line. If you're a CPG company, you care a lot about the global water usage because you need water for your production. So if you pollute all the water, you won't have any water to use, for instance, right? And energy cost is another area that a lot of companies are watching. So I think actually sort of the application of what we can do with digital services and finance within the sustainability space in supply chain, I think is one of the most exciting.
And for anyone listening who would like to delve a little bit deeper into this subject with you, look at what you're doing online, or even contact your team, what's the best way of doing that?
So, I mean, first off, just go to tradeshift.com. We have a beautiful new website where you should be able to, learn everything about what we do, and obviously also contact us. So that is just the space to start. And, we are very active. So just reach out if you're curious, have questions, maybe looking for a job, or if you think anything I just talked about today might be interesting for your company.
There's so much I love about our conversation today, especially because so much of what we're talking about is invisible to many people, but it's equally keeping the whole world running. And when we're talking about digitizing every level of the supply chain, of course, that means every participant, from banks to suppliers to buyers, all needing to connect across a broader supply chain ecosystem. And one of the things I was reading about you guys before you came on today was that internal digitization is great, but keep in mind that globally, just 8% of trade transactions are digital. And that statistic alone blew me away. But more than anything, just a big thank you for coming on here and sharing that story with me today.
Well, thank you so much, Neil.
So many big talking points there, but also a timely reminder that everyone from Google to Amazon, many companies were founded just before or during a crisis. And leaders need to take note of that today, because they're the ones that will have to take a page from that book to come out on top. And as much as COVID represents a global tragedy, it's also an opportunity to reset and rebuild in a way that we failed to in the wake of that 2008 financial crisis. And the fact that just 8% of trade transactions are digital completely blew my mind reading that stat, and I think it represents a real opportunity for positive change. But as you know, I am the eternal optimist. Maybe I got it wrong, I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you think I've oversimplified anything here and you work in that industry and you've got a different viewpoint, please share it with me. My email is techblogwriter@outlook.com. You can tweet me at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.com. .co.uk. So there's a lot of talking points here, and I cannot thank Christian enough. He had literally landed after a 10-hour flight, knocked back an espresso, and was on great form today. So a big thank you to Christian, and an even bigger thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in every day. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.